This podcast is made possible by VersaPay.
Hi, I'm Brian Gladden, CFO at Zealous. You're listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 890.
I think an important job of any CFO is to understand the complexity and then simplify it to a framework that will drive the organization forward, enable prioritization and resource allocation, and motivate people along with others. And a single revenue goal or any financial goal, I think, is the least motivating element possible. Partly because it's so abstract, partly because there's a whole host of really important people who have, no line of sight to driving revenue or EBITDA. And it's everything from your HR and your security people, but also all the way to your product people. They want to build a killer product. They don't know if it's going to generate 25 or million or 2.5 billion of revenue.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Chris Halpin, CFO of IAC. It was October of 2012 when Chris Halpin added the words coffee with Roger Goodell to his weekly calendar. The two men would talk more than an hour before Goodell, the much revered National Football League commissioner, ended the discussion by offering Halpin the opportunity to meet a number of his senior reports. Only 6 months later, Halpin kicked off an 8-year career inside the NFL. Along the way, he would serve in a succession of strategy-oriented roles before being named Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy and Growth Officer for the NFL. We'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. When your accounts receivable automation focuses only on back office tasks, you forget the most important stakeholder, your customers. VersaPay gives you all the tools you need to automate those tasks, plus the collaboration tools to take on everything that automation alone simply can't. This doesn't just increase efficiencies and accelerate cash flow, but also creates a dramatically improved experience for your customers. And as the economy tightens, can you really afford to risk losing customers over an invoice-to-cash process they find frustrating? With VersaPay, clients typically achieve 50% less time managing receivables, 25% faster payments, 30% fewer past due invoices, and 81% customer portal adoption. Learn more about VersaPay's collaborative AR, ERP payments, and cash application solutions at versapay.com/CFO. Hello, we're speaking with Chris Halpin, CFO of IAC. IAC builds companies, it buys companies, and along the way, over the last 2 decades, 11 public companies have emerged from IAC. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks for having me.
So I should also mention, Chris, I'm gonna put this up front because, as you may know, we begin by asking our guests to look back for us. But I just want to tease our audience a little bit and let them know up front here. You spent 8 years with the NFL.
That is right.
But in the C-suite, really, you were their chief strategy and growth officer. You're an executive vice president. But we'll let you fill us in, and we'd like you to take a look back for us. I know you have finance roots as well, so please take a look back and share those experiences you feel prepared you to become a CFO.
Yeah, I'll cite probably three key parts of my career that have shaped where I am today. One was I started my career at Goldman Sachs, and I joined there out of college, joined their real estate investment group, part of the merchant bank. It was called the Whitehall Funds. And it was just a fantastic experience of how to work, how to think, professionalism. This was 1998, pre-IPO, and it really was one of the best cultures I ever worked in. I always remember a senior executive said to me, I don't care if there's footage of you rescuing all the orphans single-handedly. You say, we did this, and it's not I. You only say I if you're taking, blame for something, or if you're expressing a controversial opinion. And it really was a great teaching of you win together, you lose together, and also that you have very rigorous discipline focus. The Whitehall business was exceptional at cash flow valuation, thinking about what is an asset worth, what is a cash flow stream worth. So that's clearly an anchoring both analytical background as well as cultural background to my job today. The second, I'd say, I had great 13 years at Providence Equity Partners from 2000 to 13. Really grew up there. It was a wonderful organization, getting deep in telecom, digital, elsewhere. But a very influential experience was they asked me in 2007 to go over and be the number 2 in opening an office in Hong Kong. My wife, who's a saint, agreed to go. And it was a highly formative professional experience of getting thrown in the deep end of the pool. They said, go over. I was working under a local executive, and we hired a local team, but it was figure out a strategy, build the team. It was my first experience as a manager, and as my purview ended up expanding because we made some senior leadership changes, and I ended up co-running the office. And then the financial crisis hit. And I would say, across that experience, it was very hard. It toughened me up. It was sort of my MBA experience, but on the job training. And I always say, if you can handle a bad meeting in South Korea, you can handle a bad meeting anywhere. If you can, go in and pitch in Indonesia, or try to build and manage a team in the PRC, it was very confidence building. Built up a lot of positive scar tissue. It also gave me a real experience of, being the outsider for the first time. And living in Hong Kong, our team was very diverse across PRC nationals, Hong Kong Chinese, Taiwanese, working with Koreans, folks who had Southeast Asian experience. And it was just a very formative experience for me as an executive, and for my wife and I as sort of an adventure, and half the world away from your family, raising kids. So that's one that just shaped my worldview and also got me up the management curve. And then the other was working at the NFL, and it's obviously an incredible organization. We also, it's a hard place working in live events, live sports. You're always you're so important nationally. You're dealing with things coming out of the blue. But one experience that I'd highlight is that the NFL is incredibly thoughtful and rigorous about the strategic analysis around its rights. We'll talk about other elements where I think we improved our strategic framework and thinking probably in this discussion. But when it came to, okay, here are our media rights, here are our Sunday ticket rights, or our approach to OTT, or our consumer products rights, running that business, video games, very disciplined, very thoughtful, and it's the benefit of A, having very valuable rights, and B, very long-term ownership. But it was truly mind expanding for me, of factoring in all the dynamics, including in some cases trying to drive the market in the direction we wanted to. Those are three I'd cite when you think about financial rigor, management, long-term thinking, strategy, the different elements of a CFO job.
I want to just circle back on two of the items you mentioned. One is more of personal nature, and usually I dwell on these later in the podcast, but I'm just thinking about you and your family in Asia and Hong Kong when the banks start to collapse over here. I mean, is this something you're and you mentioned, did you have kids already as you went over there? Or
we did. We went over with a 2-year-old, our oldest daughter, and then we had our son over there. And then, yeah, we were there. We'd been there probably a year and 4 months. Actually, we'd been there about eight or 9 months when Bear failed, Bear Stearns. And it was one of the most surreal experiences where we were working on a deal in Australia, got on the plane in Melbourne, and we were going to have a Friday afternoon investment committee stateside, or late Friday evening. We get on the plane Friday night in Melbourne, land in Hong Kong. And this is way before Wi-Fi on planes and any of this stuff, land. And Bear had failed while we were in flight. And so we then, Saturday morning, go to the office, get on this investment committee. And it's basically like, well, there's nothing to talk to. We're not about to buy a company given the disruption going on in the financial markets. And so that was the fastest investment committee I'd ever been in. But that sort of presaged what happened. It was really surreal for two reasons. One, you're 12 hours ahead time zone wise, and so you'd work during the day. And when you rewind to September, say 10th, China, Australia, that was the period of decoupling. And there was fervent belief that the Asia Pacific economies were on their own trajectory. And as Fannie and Freddie went down, and there started to be noises around Lehman, in the market, it was very much, this is a U.S. real estate phenomenon. This doesn't apply to us. And as I would sort of say, hey, this is huge what we're talking about. But I basically work during the day, then go to the gym and sort of mindlessly ride the elliptical watching Squawk Box, which was on at 7 to 8:30 a.m. And every day, you remember this period, there was a new sort of haymaker that came on, and then you'd stay up way too late because something would be happening. I remember watching the TARP vote live at 2 a.m. Hong Kong time when it gets voted down, being like, oh my Lord, this is all going to disintegrate. And then you wake up the next day and have to go to work and manage folks. It was surreal. And also, it was very hard logically to get mind share of my bosses in the US during this period. Very much, out of shape, out of sight, out of mind. And it was just an incredibly challenging period. You fast forward by October 1st with the way, dollar markets had frozen up and everything. China, South Korea, everywhere. Australia had hit the wall and it had come directly. But it was a surreal period.
There was isolation for anybody in your position. Like you said, you couldn't connect with the leaders. Obviously, there was a lot on their minds and what have you. At the same time, you were maybe buffered from some of it. It sounds like, given Asia Pacific was somewhat removed from it at first, but it caught up with you.
It was. I mean, I think, you're always trying to, it reminded me a lot of COVID, where you fast forward where I was at the NFL and I was overseeing international, and in a lot of knew the folks at the Premier League well, and our media partners at in Italy and elsewhere, and then we also had a China team that was very early. I remember we were at the Super Bowl in Miami, and one of our team members in China got COVID. His parents were actually from Wuhan, and he was having to quarantine. And then you saw the buildup, and even in the U.S., you're saying this is going to come here. People in Italy were saying this is spreading like wildfire. I do think that's the value of having international perspective. In the invert, it was coming from the U.S. globally and the UK globally to Asia. But you're saying you can think you're as insulated as you want, but this is a huge ground shift that's clearly going to get there, and it did. It just was a matter of weeks.
The opportunity at the NFL, it was a business development media strategy role. Clearly, there were opportunities to step into CFO roles at other companies or organizations. I think at that time you had the resume clout to do that, but no, you chose and I think a lot of people would go the path you did. It sounds really interesting. A lot of people would love to have pursued the path you did. But tell us about that decision. Was it hard? Was it a no-brainer? Was it? And again, I mean, you came in as a sort of a media strategist, business development. You go up a number of years, and you're an executive vice president there, chief strategy officer. I mean, you got where you wanted to be, clearly, but there was no promises, I'm pretty sure.
No, Roger makes no promises. That's for sure. So if you rewind to fall of 11, they asked me to come back from Hong Kong and be a partner in the U.S. private equity group. Providence had gotten very large. They were scaling it back. They said, we want you to come back and be a lead on the investing side domestically as we're reshuffling some folks here. Came back, and then I got back and I just said, I'd been there for 11 years. I was kind of bored. It was very, I won't say easy, but I, just knew all the players. And I had this kind of existential angst that I didn't want to die. And my obituary was I worked, 40 years at Providence Equity. I had a few key mentors. One of them was Michael Angelakis, who'd been a partner at Providence, and then it was CFO at Comcast at the time. A couple others, Dick Parsons, Steve Alicio. And I was saying, one of the things that always impressed me was I thought a number of the best private equity investors I'd been around had been at real companies at some point, and they had greater empathy for executives, greater. They were better on boards, and we're also advantaged in sourcing. And I said, I think I'd like to do this, to be at a company. I actually and Mike introduced me to a number, as did Dick and Steve, and pursued a couple CFO roles. And I was like, I don't really want to do this at that point, just based on the situations. Almost joined another private equity firm, and I sort of said, I'm just changing, politics I know for politics I don't know. And then in fall of 12, I asked Mike. We'd done sports at Providence, as well as a lot of media content, telecom, cable. I said, do you know anyone at the NFL? He said, actually, I know Roger Goodell quite well. So he introduced us. I got coffee with Roger in October of 2012. Supposed to be a half hour. We really hit it off. Ended up talking for an hour 15. He said, I'll introduce you to what were then his two lead deputies on the business side, Steve Bornstein and Eric Grubman. And it started a discussion. And basically he was like, look, we'll bring you in. We're doing generational shifting as certain, one generation's retiring. There's a group of you who'd be in the next phase. And, I wanted a big job, and he basically said a huge job. And he basically said, no, that's the wrong way to come into the NFL. I'll bring you in, get grounding, and then I'll move you around, give you experiences. I wanted to run a P&L at some point. That was something that was important to me. But, VP of strategy and BD, overseeing U.S. rights deals, rights strategy for NFL Network and digital. Very logical progression from Providence, but it was definitely a step backwards. And I wrestled with that. I think my comp went back 80% from what I was getting paid all in at Providence, and it was tough. Like I struggled with it. There's a lot of ego. And then I came to a conclusion in April or May of 2013. If I don't do this, I'm going to regret it. If it's a flop, I can spin a story I did sports for a couple of years, and I had a good enough network in private equity. And so I decided to make the jump. And Jonathan Nelson, who's the CEO or founder of Providence, who I love, told him right before Labor Day, and went over, ended up working both jobs for a month, which was wild. I don't recommend that to anyone. And then went, and it was, it was definitely I think I was fortunate that I sort of had a financial situation with Providence where I could take a risk like that. And I'd always wanted to, I'd always thought to sort of husband capital in a way that I could take a risk if I wanted to. But I was not some courageous jump into the breach without any reservations.
Well, now let's ask you about the next jump to IAC and into a CFO role. Tell us about what led you to make that move.
Sure. So I'd always greatly respected IAC from afar. We'd encountered them a little bit when I was at Providence, but the structure of full flexibility to invest in companies in any stage. It is a holding company that buys, builds, owns, spins off digital media companies. The stage agnostic nature of everything from starting Tinder and other companies to buying seed or early stage companies to rolling up spaces, all the way to buying slow growth companies that need to be rebooted. That's always attracted me. Permanent capital and as Joey likes to say, a forever mindset, I viewed as a fundamental advantage. It's one of those things about private equity that people don't fully appreciate. You end up in many ways being around your best companies for the least amount of time and your worst companies for the longest amount of time, because you've got to put points on the board and realize capital and return it to investors. So a lot of the best companies I worked at, we owned for probably 3 years weighted average. And the worst companies, you're going to wake up and spend time with every day because you can't get rid of them. And so the ability to build and also think big greatly attracted me. I was intrigued by also the spin model, which allows you to, build up companies and then spin them off to investors. And just as we have with Match and Expedia, LendingTree, Vimeo, others. And there's been a great track record. I really want to run something someday. There's been a great track record of CFOs from IAC becoming CEOs, Dara and others. And so I was very intrigued. Now,
and knowing these portfolio companies, a number of them probably have finance leaders and finance teams and some with full finance functions. But do you bring them together? Do you have like a round table sometimes for the portfolio finance leaders to come together and discuss, explore opportunities? What happens exactly?
Absolutely. So the structurally, IAC is at the holding company level, has about 170 employees. Roughly 70% of those are under the CFO, classic functions, accounting, tax, treasury, et cetera, as well as M&A. At the companies, every company, we have about 10 right now. Every company has their own CFO or VP of finance if it's smaller. We tend to do the accounting work, except in the case of Angie, which is standalone public company, or in the case of our minority investments, MGM and Turo. But we are service providers through our functions to the company CFOs. They would be dotted line to me. All the CEOs are straight line to Joey. And I really put an emphasis of information sharing. We have a monthly CFO meeting where they're all on. I'll give updates, board updates, audit committee, also what we're seeing from a macro or competitive perspective, what we're hearing from investors on investor relations. But also I want them to talk about their businesses of what they're seeing in consumer demand or trends, both high, medium, lower income, what they're seeing in terms of service provider behaviors, more corporate side, trends they're seeing on payment, default rates, bad debt, those activities. And then also on, digital marketing, whether SEO, SEM, or paid marketing, as well as TV for our consumer brands, they're big elements. So what are you seeing on ad rates? What are you seeing on performance, Google updates, all those activities? And then on a sort of a bilateral basis, if something comes up, get them together with finance leads that I know have dealt with certain issues previously to just have, we're the anti-conglomerate conglomerate. We're not going to force you all to have the same exact operating system or centralize all the AWS contracts under a single. We'll try to optimize, but we grant flexibility, but we want that knowledge share just so everyone has the best information when they're making decisions about resource allocation or strategic decisions.
Now, we always like to talk about your lines of sight, finance leaders' lines of sight. Obviously, this is a little more complex. You have all these different types of businesses and different sectors and opportunities with different business indicators, I suppose. But as you came in, I'm curious if you felt like I can see deep into this part of our portfolio, but here we're just not getting the data or the numbers that we need to really understand it or understand where we want to allocate capital. Any scenario that you can share with us in terms of your lines of sight and how they were modified?
Yeah, definitely. So my mother always says you're as happy as your saddest child. And when you oversee a collection of companies, that's definitely true. Where the one that you're unhappy with reporting or strategic clarity, you've got to fix that, right? And you've got our job to our shareholders is to optimize everything across the portfolio. One example, and one of the things I inherited that is excellent, and this was very much sold to me when I was exploring this, was, Barry Diller has always had, who's our chairman, has always had the view that we take business, operational, market risk. We don't take risk on accounting, SEC reporting, tax, those types of things. That has to be best in class. And that has been very much proven out since I've been here. So the quality of my team on accounting, also FP&A, tax, exceptional. Now, when it comes though to looking at businesses, you've also got the view of the companies. And one example that I came in, Angie had launched a large prong behind services. So they have an excellent historical business of a marketplace connecting consumers and service professionals on their ads and leads business, and having a fee or take rate a fee on that matching. But they'd also launched a services business where they would just commit to the consumer, we'll get it done at these prices, and they would line up the pro on basically a wholesale basis. When we got into it, there was a bunch of different services going on, different scale, different repeatability, and it was a blended P&L that I and others were struck. There was just a lack of focus on gross margin, and I'm sort of coming out of private equity and other things. I'm a huge a real believer in understand unit economics, gross margin, understand sort of semi-variable, semi-fixed costs to get to contribution margin, and then understand your G&A. And, you flow through that, multiply times volume, and that's how you get profitability and free cash flow. You could look at a number of these services and sort of relentlessly plugging away, where at those gross margins and with the fixed cost required to service, we would never get to a contribution margin that would be meaningful to the business. Or to get to break even, the amount of revenue, you could just do the back into the numbers, would have to increase 5x. And nobody wants to spend, a bunch of time and have revenue increase 400% and break even. And so then it was, we either have to improve the gross margins, or we have to manage or manage the fixed costs, or we got to get out of it. And that was, kind of relentless plugging with great folks like Mark Schneider, who runs FP&A, Andrew Ruskoff, who's now CFO at Angie, and others, to just keep distilling it down, and led to the strategic changes we made over last year, where there were elements of services that are an excellent business and increase customer experience and customer LTV like nothing else. But there were others where if everything worked out great, they were 2% contribution margin business. And that's a grocery store. And that, nobody's actively working to be in the grocery store business in our world. So that's, those elements, we feel you got to plug away, get the right data, distill it down, fight through people who might be protective of their turf. But it's gotten us to a much better part. I would say broadly across tech, sorry to digress, tech and digital, in the euphoria of free money and in COVID, everything going up. My observation coming in was there was a broader lack of focus on gross margins. And we saw it in a couple cases, and also businesses that had excellent gross margins in our portfolio. You're like, that's where you're going to generate real economic value, provided you can get the volume scale and make shareholders real money.
Well, you mentioned of the portfolio companies, maybe one has in-house their accounting processes, I suppose. Got me to thinking about HR and human capital, whether there are unified approaches that the portfolio can adopt or use, or is that something that's kept in-house largely by the company?
Those are kept in-house. We have HR at IAC that runs for the holdco, and then also manages sort of C-suite level recruiting processes for the companies, and where there's real scale economies there, or expertise. We also are focused on broader ESG activities across the companies, and diversity, those types of things. But it really is the CEO at the business should have their HR lead who's managing talent, retention, motivation. We approve the compensation schemes. We approve equity granting, and there's a pretty common philosophy across our companies when it comes to incentives and total compensation. But we want the CEOs, CFOs, heads of HR to really drive their people.
Is there, we're kind of zeroing in on this intersection of finance and human capital as we have our discussions, trying to discover if finance leaders believe they're spending a little more time at the table with the HR professionals out there as they, talent becomes challenging in certain markets. And I would imagine some of the companies struggle more than others with their recruitment functions. Maybe not, I don't know. But as AI begins to play a larger role in business and is applied in different areas, we think it'll be an interesting discussion. I don't know, from your point of view, do you see yourself spending more time with your people leaders and trying to understand the compensation, whether it's dynamic or how the model works? I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I actually think it's a core responsibility of the CFO to be partnered with your HR leader as well as CEO in those efforts. And your strategy, talent model, and compensation model all have to be aligned for any company, or you're going to have major problems or gaps. And so, if you're a true knowledge economy business where employees can have massive impacts and multiplier value impacts, then you need a recruitment, retention, and compensation model that matches that. If you are a massively distributed 10,000 person, not cog in the machine model, you've got a different recruiting. You may be willing to absorb far more churn if you're a Salesforce centric or delivery centric business than if the predominance of your people are developing code or have distinct knowledge sets and skill sets. From where we sit, the job market is challenging. The recruitment is challenging across the board, and it will theoretically soften because of the irrationality that existed in recruitment. But when you go back to the core economy, when you move, Meta and Google and Amazon may be laying off people. Reality is it's a small part of how huge they got. But the other part is the classic economy or the core economy businesses are still way understaffed when it comes to code developers, software engineers, data scientists. I mean, we saw it at the NFL. And, we would have this great talent that would come through, and Google would hire one of our data scientists on my team for something that, was mind blowing. And that's still going to normalize. I heard something that, the software engineer unemployment in Minneapolis is basically at the frictional level of probably 0.4% right now, which represents people who are actively holding out taking a job, that they're, in Target and United Healthcare are massively understaffed relative to what they need. So I think it's essential. And I think you have to link your talent and compensation model to your strategy.
Want to forgive me if I put you on the spot here with a ChatGPT question. It seems to be everywhere, and it seems to be impacting more things than we ever imagined. Curious if this organization has considered the impact of AI, generative AI, I suppose, on either on its different processes, on its approaches. Maybe there's one member of the portfolio, one portfolio company that's out in front leveraging it, and you can share ideas and things around the table. Is any of that happening yet, or is it?
Oh, definitely.
Is it? And again, I'm sure there's parts that are certainly AI savvy and have put it to work in the data area. But any observations?
Yeah, definitely. It's the number one, definitely the fastest share taker of strategic and operational discussions across our companies, and full point of focus. And I would say, there have been a lot of things that popped up, went away, et cetera, as topics du jour over the last, 5 years. This one is definitively staying. I mean, this is like the iPhone, personal computers, et cetera. I truly believe that, and people much smarter than me believe that, which would be more important. We got lucky, which was we have our annual planning meeting every year in the late November, early December timeframe, and we have one outside speaker. And this year, Barry and Joey asked Sam Altman to speak to us, and we in the lucky department, he was talking Friday, and they released ChatGPT on that Tuesday, and so we're sitting at our Wednesday Wednesday kickoff meeting, looking at the Twitter. It blowing up on Twitter of what's happening. We're like, wow, look at this thing. This will make it interesting. Of course, he then explains it. And, we ended up, Barry was interviewing him, but we were asking questions, and it probably went for an hour 40. And then that really precipitated, and people started to, use the service, the product themselves. And there are two, key vectors that come out of it. One is productivity improvement, and was also a key point of discussion in our board meeting. And one of our board members said, in Hollywood, scriptwriters are now using ChatGPT to come up with the outline and first drafts of scripts that used to take 6 months for bright shiny things from Harvard and USC to come up with. Now ChatGPT, it's not great, but they can lay out the framework and give you something to work for. And we've heard that in numbers. So we think a lot about the productivity improvements. We also think about the threats, and what generative AI means for proprietary IP, which some of our properties have, and also how much it would disrupt the existing search and consumer pathways to information that, for better or worse, exist today. We have active discussions. A number of groups, a number of companies are more testing it right now or have identified targeted use cases for it. A lot of testing going on, and also a lot of diligence. I think where you'll end up on the business side is, and a bunch of businesses have commercial licenses. You basically create your own interface through the API into ChatGPT to render the functionality that you need. We also think you're going to see, ChatGPT is incredibly broad, ingesting everything. You're going to see vertically specialized generative AI models come along that focus on specific areas and will be even deeper and sharper in certain categories. So how do we plug those into, help develop them, use our proprietary data sets to develop them, and then create the customer-facing interfaces to reach what are often massive audiences that we have.
Wow, some nice detail there for us. Thank you. We are up to our finance strategic moment question, where we're going to ask you to go back in time and identify some moment of insight that maybe it was an opportunity that was pursued or risk avoided, some moment in time where there was perhaps a strategic decision made. Anything come to mind for you?
The one that sticks with me was in 2017, they asked me to become chief strategy officer and build a long-term strategic plan at the NFL. And it was a recognition that the media landscape was changing so much. Social media was impacting every part of our business, for the good and the bad. Technology was becoming increasingly essential, obviously to reach fans, track sentiment, but also on field. And the investments that we needed to make there would be profound, and to stay ahead of the fans' expectations to render the best game possible. But to make them, you needed a long-term plan for both employees, for all our stakeholders, employees, the owners, union, partners, everyone, to say, we're going to do this. This is what we're looking to generate, and it's going to generate X, Y, and Z in the end. To that point, the only strategic marker that was publicly out there was the revenue goal of $25 billion that had, by 2027, that had been put out in 2010. And it was a matter of, let's really go down, understand all our businesses, get them unified, develop prioritization, which is a huge point of focus, a common language to have the businesses understand how they need to, the groups within it, football, player health and safety, media, sponsorship, ticketing, our 32 teams who are both local franchisees and owners, and come up with a framework that would lead to collective success. I think an important job of any CFO is to understand the complexity and then simplify it to a framework that will drive the organization forward, enable prioritization and resource allocation, and motivate people along with others. And a single revenue goal or any financial goal, I think, is the least motivating element possible. Partly because it's so abstract, partly because there's a whole host of really important people who have, no line of sight to driving revenue or EBITDA. And it's everything from your HR and your security people, but also all the way to your product people. They want to build a killer product. They don't know if it's going to generate 25 or million or 2.5 billion of revenue. And so we came up with a framework we had three major priority: game, fans, engagement. Game is the product, make that as good, as safe, as technologically as advanced as possible. The game is the product that drives fans. At Starbucks, it's coffee drives consumers. Have as diverse and rich a fan base that we truly understand from a data and analytics perspective. Make sure that we're shored up across demographics, reach young fans, reach international young fans especially, and drive that fan base to new levels. And then engagement. And that's everything from buying a ticket to buying a t-shirt to playing Madden to watching on TV or on your iPhone, liking something on Facebook. And fans times engagement is the health. And then that generates revenue. And if you're setting ROI on what you're investing there and ROI targets, you'll drive profitability. It was really helpful. It was the hope, but it was really helpful for everyone understanding. Here's how the football people plug in. They're the product. They're essential. If people aren't happy with the replay review times or the pace of the game, that's going to hurt everything down funnel. Getting people's, and this is also using data and analytics to frame out what is either prove out what are people's assumptions or prove them false by showing them real data. It's obvious, but it's such a more effective tool than battling, not to use a football term, but armchair quarterbacks telling you what's happening. And then emphasizing all of these produce financial outcomes rather than focus on the financial outcome. It was a very formative and positively reinforcing experience for me of how to orient an organization and also make decisions in a fixed resource pool.
Hello and welcome to 60-second stories from CFO Thought Leader. Looking back on their career-building years, few finance leaders ever forget the first time they presented to a board of directors. Present-day CFOs tell us that the penetrating stares from across the boardroom table remain locked in time, evergreen in their memories forever. For Jim Young, the stares that remain evergreen were not cast across a boardroom table, but instead a room populated by hundreds of his company's employees. Young says a finance presentation he gave a decade or more ago remains memorable because of what followed it. There were questions. Lots of them. However, Young tells us it was not his analysis or the inclusion of a new metric that the audience found so engaging. Instead, Young tells us it was simply because his presentation connected the dots. You'll hear that story and much more on episode number 876 of CFO Thought Leader, featuring CFO Jim Young of Coalition. Remember, the future of finance is listening.
Well, let me ask you an NFL-related question. And you shared with us that chapter and the decision-making that went in it. Great, interesting story. If you could go back to the start of that journey and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be?
Of that?
Year one of the 8-year tour there.
Yeah, I ended up with very good relations with a number of teams, a number of owners. And still very close. I went back to, the Super Bowl, and it was just great seeing both league staff, league employees, as well as clubs, presidents, owners, partners. But I was too shy to go visit teams early in my career. And I kind of thought, they got tons of stuff going on. They don't want this guy from corporate. Even if I'm genuinely intellectually curious, I had this inertia about just go to Philly and meet with the Eagles, and I needed a reason, like a real reason to do it, and that's fair. But as I did it more, and my job changed, and especially when I ran consumer products, but even more when I ran strategy, I had to do it. But it was also very informative. It's an unusual dynamic in a sports league. It would be like if all the franchisees owned Dunkin' Donuts, right? That's sports leagues. They're the local franchises. The vast majority of direct consumer or fan interactions happen at the teams and so much of the energy, but they also own you evenly. And so the more you can understand what their challenges are and hear directly, and then you can also, instead of being this kind of opaque ivory tower, explain why the decisions you're making, the basis of them, not that you're, stick in the muds who don't want change, but actually this makes sense for you and your market, but these guys over here have a totally different set of dynamics and we need to kind of advance the collective. It helped me do my job better. It also helped me understand what our fans were really saying, what the challenges of our franchisees who own us are. And I hopefully think it, helped the league, and a number of colleagues were going out to see the teams, but helped the league be seen as much more sympathetic and constructive to our 32 teams. And I just should have done more and would have gotten up the curve on a number of issues faster.
Interesting. Great recall for us. Thanks for that.
Also, if I could do one thing over, I was also responsible for the colorblind game where we had the jerseys of green and red. We spent a lot of time worried about player colorblind, but I totally forgot 8% of the male fans can't see. So it was for the league. You didn't ask me what my biggest mistake was, but if I had to go backwards, it would be not to do that.
We ask guests to reflect a little on the personal side of things, wondering if you have a personal habit, part of a daily routine, something that you are known for that sets you apart, perhaps. People years later after working with you or would point this out. Maybe a family member would point it out and say, he's always done that.
Yeah, the two things, and I always feel like when you work for people, you see the things that you like and you steal, and then you see the things that you really don't like and you do the opposite or you don't do those. That's what we're all trying for. I remember visiting Michael Angelakis at my parents always said, say thank you, write a thank you note, all those things. But I remember visiting Michael Angelakis, who's CFO of Comcast, top 3 guy at God knows how big a company. And he knew the name of we went to the cafeteria and he knew the name of the woman behind who checked us out. And he said hello to everybody. And it really stuck with me. And I think I was doing it at the time at Providence, but I really made a point out of it of, looking everybody in the eye. I really try to. I'm not perfect, but look everyone in the eye, learn their names, especially in the admin and in the critical functions that you take for granted. Say thank you to everybody, including anybody on your team or others who write an email. I mean, the amount of great emails that people write over time that nobody says thank you or good job, and it's sort of it's the golden rule. When you were 23, it meant the world when somebody said good job or do it to others. And I remember, there was, when I was leaving Providence, a couple portfolio companies mentioned, don't ever stop just writing short emails back on something, thank you, to show that you've seen it and all that stuff. I tried to bring that to the NFL and do that here. And it's not virtue signaling. It's not any of that. It's just, it's like, it means you got to say thank you to people that enable you to do your job. You got to also, see people as people, and they're struggling with their commute stunk that day, or, they're worried about their sick mother or those things. And I just think that humanizing element, any leader has to do. And frankly, the people I've worked for who didn't do it, I remember I worked for somebody who for 4 years, and I'm 99% confident they have no idea how many kids I have or what any of their names are or any of that stuff. It's not a culture people want to be in. So that would be what comes to mind.
We always ask for a book recommendation. It might be a book that influenced your thinking one way or the other. It might be a book you escape with. Anything care to recommend?
There's, yeah, I mean, from the business side, two books that were very sort of formula for me. One was When Genius Failed, which was on long-term capital by Lowenstein. And it was just a great thing to read. That was right as I started my analyst training program. We were sitting there watching Russia melt and everything every day. But it was a really informative book that impacted me. I was like, I'm never going to be shorting, whatever Danish kroner bonds, but of the smartest people in the world can, quote unquote, can totally lose context. And, you set up a fail machine. No matter, if you lose totally the forest for the trees, things can go wrong. One book that was very influential is The Innovator's Dilemma. I used to give that to anybody who worked for me. I think it is. I mean, talk about ChatGPT. Right now, Google is in the innovator's dilemma, where they're going to have to decide if it's going like a Mack truck in one direction, how much of their existing search business do they want to cannibalize? It is a model that is relentlessly applicable to incumbents. It was a real issue for us at the NFL. And I think actually Roger and those folks did a great job of maintaining broadcast reach while building up streaming. But how much do you want to cannibalize yourself? And then a book that was just very influential, my dad gave me, or actually a book for fun that I think is for young parents, is by Adam Gopnik, called From Paris to the Moon, about being a young father in Paris and France, and totally enjoyable. I'd recommend to any, especially a young dad.
Excellent. Thank you for those, both of those. Wonderful. We are up to our final question, where we're going to ask you, Chris, to look forward finally the next 12 months. We'd like to know what your priorities are as CFO of IAC.
Yeah, so in our bigger businesses, Dotdash Meredith went through bruising integration. I would say it wasn't the minnow swallowing the whale, but it was sort of the orca swallowing the whale, and was challenging. And the ad market fell out of bed last summer. Driving along, get the business to stability and growth, and we think it'll be a very strong free cash flow and internet share taker going forward. Secondly, driving margin and revenue growth at Angie with Joey in there as CEO, and then finally, intelligent capital allocation. It's an interesting market for M&A. Potentially share buybacks, all those activities. Barry and Joey have been phenomenal capital allocators over time. It's more of an IAC market where there's a cost to capital, and everyone doesn't think every idea is going to the moon. Find the best businesses and continue on the newest stage of IAC's growth.
Chris Halpin, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack. It's been great.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.